Okay, and so in that earlier video I showed you what we're dealing with here. So there's definitely a relationship between rectangular coordinates and polar coordinates. And so if I'm converting between the two to go from polar to rectangular, I'm going to use the fact that I know that x equals r times the cosine of theta. And I'm going to use the fact that y equals r times the sine of theta. And then if I'm going, definitely need these. Alright, and then if I'm going from rectangular to polar, then I know that r squared is going to equal x squared plus y squared, and that the tangent of theta is y over x. Alright, and so really everything we do in these next few sections is going to go back to this. Alright, so in number 30, for example, they ask me to convert the polar coordinates to rectangular coordinates. Well, this is a polar coordinate, so this is r and this is theta. And if I'm converting this, then I'm going to use the fact that x equals r times the cosine of theta, so x is going to equal 6 times the cosine, 2 pi over 3. Alright, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I've got the cosine of 2 pi over 3, which is the cosine of 120 degrees. So that is just my reference angle 60. It's in quadrant 2, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going back over that. These are the exact values that you should know. Alright, so this is just going to be 6 times negative 1/2. So x is going to equal negative 3. Alright, and then when I find y, I know that y equals 6 times the sine of theta, or 2 pi over 3. And in this case, that's going to be 6 times. Alright, so this is going to be positive because I'm in the second quadrant, and that's going to be the square root of 3 over 2. And if I simplify that, that's just going to be 3 times the square root of 3. Alright, so converting from from polar to rectangular, my rectangular coordinates are negative 3 square root 3. Okay? Alright, let's do another one. 36, same thing. This is my r, this is my theta. I know that x is going to equal r times the cosine of theta. Y is going to equal r times the sine of theta. Alright, so if I'm looking at that, you can do this however you want to. You can use your even odd functions. You can find a coterminal angle, which is probably what I'm going to do, because right now I'm looking at that and thinking negative 5 pi over 3. So I'm visualizing this and thinking I'm going clockwise this direction, and if I went all the way around negative 5 pi over there, I'd actually end up at pi over 3, or 60 degrees. This is negative 300 degrees, which is the same thing as 60 degrees positive. Alright, so I'm looking at square root of 3 times the cosine of 60 degrees, which is 1/2. So that's just going to equal square root of 3 over 2. And then here, same thing here, the sine of 60 degrees, so I've got the square root of 3 times the square root of 3 over 2, which is, when I multiply the numerator times the numerator, that's just going to be 3 halves. Alright, so my rectangular coordinates in this case, my x value was the square root of 3 over 2, my y value was 3 over 2. Okay? Alright, let's go the other way with it. Alright, here I'm given the rectangular coordinates, and I am looking for r and theta. Alright, so what information are we going to use here? Well, we know that r squared equals x squared plus y squared. So r squared is going to equal x squared plus y squared. And then I'm just going to do the calculation there. Alright, so I've got 3 squared, which is 9. Square root of 3 squared is 3, so 9 times 3, which is 27. And negative 3 squared is 9. So r squared is 36, which means r is 6. Alright, we're just looking at our positive radius here. Alright, so and I've got my r, now I just need my theta, and I know that the tangent of theta is going to equal y over x. And let's clean this up to something you know that's familiar. Okay, so if I multiply and get rid of this radical in the denominator, this is actually going to be negative square root 3 over 3. Alright, and we do know that theta is the tangent of what angle is square root of 3 over 3. Well, that's 30 degrees, or pi over 6. Now, this is the issue. Alright, really, if you think about this, if I'm looking for an angle and I need the tangent of that angle to be negative, what quadrant am I going to pull this angle out of? Is it going to be quadrant 2 or quadrant 4? We know it can't be quadrant 1 or 3 because tangent is positive in quadrants 1 and 3. Alright, this is where I'm going to have to go back and think about where this point would be. Alright, so if I were graphing this point, right, I would go to the right, square root of 3 times the square root of 3, and I would go down negative 3, which means I'm in quadrant 4. Alright, and that is going to tell me where I need to pull this angle out of. So if I'm looking for the tangent of what angle is the square root of 3 over 3, I'm in quadrant 4 to get the negative. Well, that's just going to be 11 pi over 6, or 330 degrees. Alright, so my polar coordinates in this case are 6, 11 pi over 6. Alright, I'm going to do one more of those. Alright, so there's my x, there's my y. I know that r squared is going to equal negative square root of 6 squared plus negative square root of 2 squared. Alright, that's going to be 6, that's going to be 2. So if r squared equals 8, then I know that r is going to equal the square root of 8. And if I really clean that up, that's just going to be 2 times the square root of 2. Alright, I also know that the tangent of theta is going to equal my y value over my x value. Alright, and I can clean this up. However, I know my negatives are going to cancel because I've got a negative divided by a negative. I also am probably just going to look at this and go, well, this is the same thing as the square root of 2 over 6, which is the same thing as square root of 1/3. So that's just going to equal 1 over the square root of 3. And once again, I'm going to put this in a form that I recognize. So that's going to be the square root of 3 over 3, which once again is pi over 6, or 30 degrees. Alright, so my theta is going to be, my reference angle at least, is going to be 30 degrees. Now what quadrant is this in? Think about that. If I go to the left and down, that's quadrant 3. Quadrant 3. So you know this was positive, so it had to come out of quadrant 1 or 3, but you've got to be careful because you got to get the quadrant right so you can get the angle right. In this case, if my reference angle is 30 degrees out of quadrant 3, that would be 180 plus 30 degrees, or 210 degrees, or we would say 7 pi over 6, however you want to write that. Alright, so there's my r, there's my theta, so my polar coordinates are 2 square root 2